Section 44 of After Dark. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Warren Cotty, Gurnee, Illinois. After Dark by Wilkie Collins. The Professor's Story of the Yellow Mask, Part 3rd, Chapter 3. The next night, at the time of assembling specified in the invitations to the masked ball, Fabio was still lingering in his palace, and still allowing the black domino to lie untouched and unheeded on his dressing-table. This delay was not produced by any change in his resolution to go to the Melanie Palace. His determination to be present at the ball remained unshaken, and yet, at the last moment, he lingered and lingered on, without knowing why. Some strange influence seemed to be keeping him within the walls of his lonely home. It was as if the great, empty, silent palace had almost recovered on that night the charm which it had lost when its mistress died. He left his own apartment and went to the bedroom where his infant child lay asleep in her little crib. He sat watching her and thinking quietly and tenderly of many past events in his life for a long time, then returned to his room. A sudden sense of loneliness came upon him after his visit to the child's bedside, but he did not attempt to raise his spirits even then by going to the ball. He descended instead to his study, lighted his reading lamp, and then, opening a bureau, took from one of the drawers in it the letter which Nanina had written to him. This was not the first time that a sudden sense of his solitude had connected itself inexplicably with the remembrance of the work-girl's letter. He read it through slowly, and when he had done, kept it open in his hand. "I have youth, titles, wealth," he thought to himself sadly, "everything that is sought after in this world. And yet, if I try to think of any human being who really and truly loves me, I can remember but one, the poor, faithful girl who wrote these lines." Old recollections of the first day when he met with Nanina, of the first sitting she had given him in Luca Lomi's studio, of the first visit to the neat little room in the by-street, began to rise more and more vividly in his mind. Entirely absorbed by them, he sat absently drawing with pen and ink, on some sheets of letter paper lying under his hand, lines and circles, and fragments of decorations, and vague remembrances of old ideas for statues, until the sudden sinking of the flame of his lamp awoke his attention abruptly to present things. He looked at his watch. It was close on midnight. This discovery at last aroused him to the necessity of immediate departure. In a few minutes he had put on his domino and mask, and was on his way to the ball. Before he reached the Melanie Palace, the first part of the entertainment had come to an end. The toy symphony had been played, the grotesque dance performed, amid universal laughter, and now the guests were, for the most part, fortifying themselves in the Arcadian bowers for new dances, in which all persons present were expected to take part. The Marquis Melanie had, with characteristic oddity, divided his two classical refreshment rooms into what he termed the light and heavy departments. Fruit, pastry, sweetmeats, salads, and harmless drinks were included under the first head, and all the stimulating liquors and solid eatables under the last. The 30 shepherdesses had been, according to the Marquis's order, equally divided at the outset of the evening between the two rooms. But as the company began to crowd more and more resolutely in the direction of the heavy department, 10 of the shepherdesses attached to the light department were told off to assist in attending on the hungry and thirsty majority of guests who were not to be appeased by pastry and lemonade. Among the 5 girls who were left behind in the room for the light refreshments was Nanina. The steward soon discovered that the novelty of her situation made her really nervous, and he wisely concluded that, if he trusted her where the crowd was greatest and the noise loudest, she would not only be utterly useless, but also very much in the way of her more confident and experienced companions. When Fabio arrived at the palace, the jovial uproar in the heavy department was at its height, and several gentlemen, fired by the classical costumes of the shepherdesses, were beginning to speak Latin to them with a thick utterance, and a valorous contempt for all restrictions of gender, number, and case. As soon as he could escape from the congratulations on his return to his friends, which poured on him from all sides, Fabio withdrew to seek some quieter room. The heat, noise, and confusion had so bewildered him, after the tranquil life he had been leading for many months past, that it was quite a relief to stroll through the half-deserted dancing-rooms, to the opposite extremity of the great suite of apartments, and there to find himself in a second Arcadian bower, which seemed peaceful enough to deserve its name. A few guests were in this room when he first entered it, but the distant sound of some first notes of dance music drew them all away. After a careless look at the quaint decorations about him, he sat down alone on a divan near the door, and beginning already to feel the heat and discomfort of his mask, took it off. He had not removed it more than a moment before he heard a faint cry in the direction of a long refreshment table, behind which the 5 waiting girls were standing. He started up directly, and could hardly believe his senses, when he found himself standing face to face with Nanina. Her cheeks had turned perfectly colorless. Her astonishment at seeing the young nobleman appeared to have some sensation of terror mingled with it. The waiting woman who happened to stand by her side instinctively stretched out an arm to support her, observing that she caught at the edge of the table as Fabio hurried round to get behind it and speak to her. When he drew near, her head drooped on her breast, and she said faintly, "I never knew you were at Pisa. I never thought you would be here. Oh, I am true to what I said in my letter, though I seem so false to it. I want to speak to you about the letter, to tell you how carefully I have kept it, how often I have read it," said Fabio. She turned away her head, and tried hard to repress the tears that would force their way into her eyes. "We should never have met," she said. "Never, never have met again." Before Fabio could reply, the waiting woman by Nanina's side interposed. "For heaven's sake, don't stop speaking to her here!" she exclaimed impatiently. "If the steward or one of the upper servants was to come in, you would get her into dreadful trouble. Wait till tomorrow, and find some fitter place than this." Fabio felt the justice of the reproof immediately. He tore a leaf out of his pocketbook, and wrote on it, "I must tell you how I honor and thank you for that letter. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, the wicket gate at the back of the Ascoli Gardens. Believe in my truth and honor, Nanina, for I believe implicitly in yours." Having written these lines, he took from among his bunch of watch seals a little key, wrapped it up in the note, and pressed it into her hand. In spite of himself, his fingers lingered round hers, and he was on the point of speaking to her again, when he saw the waiting woman's hand, which was just raised to motion him away, suddenly drop. Her color changed at the same moment, and she looked fixedly across the table. He turned round immediately and saw a masked woman standing alone in the room, dressed entirely in yellow from head to foot. She had a yellow hood, a yellow half mask with deep fringe hanging down over her mouth, and a yellow domino, cut at the sleeves and edges into long flame-shaped points, which waved backward and forward tremulously in the light air wafted through the doorway. The woman's black eyes seemed to gleam with an evil brightness through the sight holes of the mask, and the tawny fringe hanging before her mouth fluttered slowly with every breath she drew. Without a word or a gesture she stood before the table, and her gleaming black eyes fixed steadily on Fabio the instant he confronted her. A sudden chill struck through him, as he observed that the yellow of the stranger's domino and mask was of precisely the same shade as the yellow of the hangings and furniture which his wife had chosen after their marriage for the decoration of her favorite sitting room. "The Yellow Mask," whispered the waiting girls nervously, crowding together behind the table. "The Yellow Mask again. Make her speak. Ask her to have something. This gentleman will ask her. Speak to her, sir. Do speak to her. She glides about in that fearful yellow dress like a ghost." Fabio looked around mechanically at the girl who was whispering to him. He saw at the same time that Nanina still kept her head turned away, and that she had her handkerchief at her eyes. She was evidently struggling yet with the agitation produced by their unexpected meeting, and was, most probably for that reason, the only person in the room not conscious of the presence of the Yellow Mask. "Speak to her, sir, do speak to her," whispered two of the waiting girls together. Fabio turned again toward the table. The black eyes were still gleaming at him from behind the tawny yellow of the mask. He nodded to the girls who had just spoken, cast one farewell look at Nanina, and moved down the room to get round to the side of the table at which the Yellow Mask was standing. Step by step as he moved the bright eyes followed him. Steadily and more steadily their evil light seemed to shine through and through him as he turned the corner of the table and approached the still, spectral figure. He came close up to the woman, but she never moved. Her eyes never wavered for an instant. He stopped and tried to speak, but the chill struck through him again. An overpowering dread, an unutterable loathing seized on him. All sense of outer things, the whispering of the waiting girls behind the table, the gentle cadence of the dance music, the distant hum of joyous talk, suddenly left him. He turned away shuddering, and quitted the room. Following the sound of the music, and desiring before all things now to join the crowd wherever it was largest, he was stopped in one of the smaller apartments by a gentleman who had just risen from the card table, and who held out his hand with the cordiality of an old friend. "Welcome back to the world, Count Fabio," he began gaily, then suddenly checked himself. "Why, you look pale, and your hand feels cold. Not ill, I hope?" "No, no, I've been rather startled, I can't say why, by a very strangely dressed woman, who fairly stared me out of countenance." "You don't mean the Yellow Mask?" "Yes, I do. Have you seen her?" "Everybody has seen her, but nobody can make her unmask, or get her to speak. Our host has not the slightest notion who she is, and our hostess is horribly frightened at her. For my part, I think she has given us quite enough of her mystery and her grim dress. And if my name, instead of being nothing but plain Andrea d'Arbino, was Marquis Melani, I would say to her, 'Madam, we are here to laugh and amuse ourselves. Suppose you open your lips, and charm us by appearing in a prettier dress.'" During this conversation they had sat down together, with their backs toward the door, by the side of one of the card tables. While D'Arbino was speaking, Fabio suddenly felt himself shuddering again, and became conscious of a sound of low breathing behind him. He turned round instantly, and there, standing between them, and peering down at them, was the Yellow Mask. Fabio started up, and his friend followed his example. Again the gleaming black eyes rested steadily on the young nobleman's face, and again their look chilled him to the heart. "Yellow Lady, do you know my friend?" exclaimed D'Arbino with mock solemnity. There was no answer. The fatal eyes never moved from Fabio's face. "Yellow Lady," continued the other, "listen to the music. Will you dance with me?" The eyes looked away, and the figure glided slowly from the room. "My dear Count," said D'Arbino, "that woman seems to have quite an effect on you. I declare she has left you paler than ever. Come into the supper room with me, and have some wine. You really look as if you wanted it." They went at once to the large refreshment room. Nearly all the guests had by this time begun to dance again. They had the whole apartment, therefore, almost entirely to themselves. Among the decorations of the room, which were not strictly in accordance with genuine Arcadian simplicity, was a large looking-glass, placed over a well-furnished sideboard. D'Arbino led Fabio in this direction, exchanging greetings as he advanced with the gentleman who stood near the glass looking into it, and carelessly fanning himself with his mask. "My dear friend," cried D'Arbino, "you are the very man to lead us straight to the best bottle of wine in the palace. Count Fabio, let me present to you my intimate and good friend, the Cavaliere Finello, with whose family I know you are well acquainted. Finello, the count is a little out of spirits, and I have prescribed a good dose of wine. I see a whole row of bottles at your side, and I leave it to you to apply the remedy. Glasses there, 3 glasses, my lovely shepherdess with the black eyes, the 3 largest you have got." The glasses were brought, the Cavaliere Finello chose a particular bottle, and filled them. All 3 gentlemen turned round to the sideboard to use it as a table, and thus necessarily faced the looking-glass. "Now let us drink the toast of toasts," said D'Arbino. "Finello, Count Fabio, the ladies of Pisa." Fabio raised the wine to his lips, and was on the point of drinking it, when he saw reflected in the glass the figure of the Yellow Mask. The glittering eyes were again fixed on him, and the yellow-hooded head bowed slowly, as if in acknowledgment of the toast he was about to drink. For the 3rd time the strange chill seized him, and he set down his glass of wine untasted. "What is the matter?" asked D'Arbino. "Have you any dislike, Count, to that particular wine?" inquired the Cavaliere. "The Yellow Mask," whispered Fabio. "The Yellow Mask again." They all 3 turned round directly toward the door, but it was too late. The figure had disappeared. "Does anyone know who this Yellow Mask is?" asked Finello. "One may guess by the walk that the figure is a woman's. Perhaps it may be the strange color she has chosen for her dress, or perhaps her stealthy way of moving from room to room, but there is certainly something mysterious and startling about her." "Startling enough, as the Count would tell you," said D'Arbino. "The Yellow Mask has been responsible for his loss of spirits and change of complexion, and now she has prevented him even from drinking his wine." "I can't account for it," said Fabio, looking round him uneasily. "But this is the 3rd room into which she has followed me, the 3rd time she has seemed to fix her eyes on me alone. I suppose my nerves are hardly in a fit state yet for masked balls and adventures. The sight of her seems to chill me. Who can she be?" "If she followed me for a 4th time," said Finello, "I should insist on her unmasking." "And suppose she refused?" asked his friend. "Then I should take her mask off for her." "It is impossible to do that with a woman," said Fabio. "I prefer trying to lose her in the crowd. Excuse me, gentlemen, if I leave you to finish the wine, and then to meet you, if you like, in the great ballroom." He retired as he spoke, put on his mask, and joined the dancers immediately, taking care to keep always in the most crowded corner of the apartment. For some time this plan of action proved successful, and he saw no more of the mysterious yellow domino. Ere long, however, some new dances were arranged, in which the great majority of the persons in the ballroom took part, the figures resembling the old English country dances in this respect, that the ladies and gentlemen were placed in long rows opposite to each other. The sets consisted of about 20 couples each, placed sometimes across, and sometimes along the apartment, and the spectators were all required to move away on either side, and range themselves close to the walls. As Fabio, among others, complied with this necessity, he looked down a row of dancers waiting during the performance of the orchestral prelude, and there, watching him again, from the opposite end of the lane formed by the gentlemen on one side and the ladies on the other, he saw the Yellow Mask. He moved abruptly back toward another row of dancers, placed at right angles to the first row, and there again, At the opposite end of the gay lane of brightly dressed figures was the Yellow Mask. He slipped into the middle of the room, but it was only to find her occupying his former position near the wall, and still, in spite of his disguise, watching him through row after row of dancers. The persecution began to grow intolerable. He felt a kind of angry curiosity mingling now with the vague dread that had hitherto oppressed him. Finello's advice recurred to his memory, and he determined to make the woman unmask at all hazards. With this intention he returned to the supper-room in which he had left his friends. They were gone, probably to the ballroom, to look for him. Plenty of wine was still left on the sideboard, and he poured himself out a glass. Finding that his hand trembled as he did so, he drank several more glasses in quick succession to nerve himself for the approaching encounter with the Yellow Mask. While he was drinking he expected every moment to see her in the looking-glass again, but she never appeared, and yet he felt almost certain that he had detected her gliding out after him when he left the ballroom. He thought it possible that she might be waiting for him in one of the smaller apartments, and, taking off his mask, walked through several of them without meeting her, until he came to the door of the refreshment-room in which Nanina and he had recognized each other. The waiting-woman behind the table, who had first spoken to him, caught sight of him now, and ran round to the door. "Don't come in and speak to Nanina again," she said, mistaking the purpose which had brought him to the door. "What with frightening her first, and making her cry afterward, you have rendered her quite unfit for her work. The steward is in there at this moment, very good-natured, but not very sober. He says she is pale and red-eyed, and not fit to be a shepherdess any longer, and that, as she will not be missed now, she may go home if she likes. We have got her an old cloak, and she is going to try and slip through the rooms unobserved, to get downstairs and change her dress. Don't speak to her, pray, or you will only make her cry again, and what is worse, make the steward fancy—" She stopped at that last word, and pointed suddenly over Fabio's shoulder. "The Yellow Mask!" she exclaimed. "Oh, sir, draw her away into the ballroom, and give Nanina a chance of getting out." Fabio turned directly, and approached the mask, who, as they looked at each other, slowly retreated before him. The waiting-woman, seeing the yellow figure retire, hastened back to Nanina in the refreshment-room. Slowly the masked woman retreated from one apartment to another till she entered a corridor brilliantly lighted up and beautifully ornamented with flowers. On the right hand this corridor led to the ballroom, on the left to an antechamber at the head of the palace staircase. The Yellow Mask went on a few paces toward the left, then stopped. The bright eyes fixed themselves as before on Fabio's face, but only for a moment. He heard a light step behind him, and then he saw the eyes move. Following the direction they took, he turned round and discovered Nanina, wrapped up in the old cloak which was to enable her to get downstairs unobserved. "Oh, how can I get out? How can I get out?" cried the girl, shrinking back affrightedly as she saw the Yellow Mask. "That way," said Fabio, pointing in the direction of the ballroom. "Nobody will notice you in the cloak. It will only be thought some new disguise." He took her arm as he spoke, to reassure her, and continued in a whisper, "Don't forget tomorrow." At the same moment he felt a hand laid on him. It was the hand of the masked woman, and it put him back from Nanina. In spite of himself, he trembled at her touch, but still retained presence of mind enough to sign to the girl to make her escape. With a look of eager inquiry in the direction of the mask, and a half-suppressed exclamation of terror, she obeyed him, and hastened away toward the ballroom. "We are alone," said Fabio, confronting the gleaming black eyes, and reaching out his hand resolutely toward the Yellow Mask. "Tell me who you are, and why you follow me, or I will uncover your face, and solve the mystery for myself." The woman pushed his hand aside, and drew back a few paces, but never spoke a word. He followed her. There was not an instant to be lost, for just then the sound of footsteps hastily approaching the corridor became audible. "Now or never," he whispered to himself, and snatched at the mask. His arm was again thrust aside, but this time the woman raised her disengaged hand at the same moment, and removed the yellow mask. The lamps shed their soft light full on her face. It was the face of his dead wife. End of section 44. Recording by Warren Cotty, Gurnee, Illinois.